Welcome back to Tanya in 5. The last few days we've been studying chapter 18. Having established that in addition to the Beinoni's intense internal struggle for self-control and discipline, he also requires some emotional attachment to God. In the preceding chapters we described an emotional attachment that is born of a deep understanding and contemplation in the greatness and beauty of God. The next few chapters, the Alter Rebbe is going to lay out a pathway for attachment to God that does not require the kind of intellectual prowess that the pathway of the preceding chapters require. This attachment that he's going to describe is what he terms the ahava mesuteres, the hidden love. Within every Jew, there is concealed a natural inborn love for God. And the only question is how to tap into it. First, in chapter 18 and 19, the Alter Rebbe is going to define this hidden love and going to tell us how we might experience it. And in chapter 18, he addresses the following. First of all, where does it come from? How does every Jew have this inherent hidden love for God? To that he says, our forefathers have so self-surrendered their personal being to God to the point that they had no independent desire or motivation. They were like vehicles for God. Just like my car doesn't have an independent will, it just exists to fulfill my command through it. So too, our forefathers were so self-surrendered to God that they were like transparent vehicles to express godliness in this world. This reality was so deep for them that it became part of their spiritual DNA. And ever since then, that spiritual DNA has been passed on to every one of their descendants, to every Jew. And this is indeed the divine and godly spark we've been talking about in chapter 2. Now, where in the soul does one experience godliness? Seemingly, the human being is a limited, mortal man. God is infinite. How does the mortal man contain within him infinite? So the Alter Rebbe identifies a certain level of the soul called Chokhmah. The level of Chokhmah is the innate capacity the soul has to produce ideas. So think of the moment that an idea pops into your head. You know that there is some part of you that can produce that idea, but you don't know what it is. It's not as if you can go somewhere into the back of your brain, open up a file cabinet, and pull out a bunch of ideas. You have to kind of clear your mind and surrender to the innate ability you have for ideas and allow the idea to come forth. It's true creativity. True creativity is an innate capacity we have, and there's just somewhere in our subconscious that just produces these ideas. And therefore, this capacity for Chokhmah, says the Alter Rebbe, is not logic itself. It's not as if we know the mechanisms of how ideas come to us, but it is the source of logic. It transcends logic, but it is the source of logic. And that is where you can meet the infinite, in the part of you that transcends your logical and rational limitations. And that is where faith exists. Faith exists not as the result of some logical and rational conclusion. No. Faith is the acknowledgement that there are some things that are beyond my rationale. There are some things that are beyond my logic. And all of my logic and all of my reason are only built on the faith that I have, which transcends my logic. And that is where I can meet the infinite. When I acknowledge my limits. Even as lofty as my intellect is, and as great and as smart as I am, it falls short of infinite. And when I acknowledge that, and I have faith in that which is beyond, now I'm tapping into God himself. And that is where this hidden love exists. In this divine space within the soul that transcends the limits of the normal human experience of logic and reason. And this is expressed in the fact that every Jew is capable of literally giving up his life for God. It has happened in history, unfortunately, and God forbid if it ever happened again, and a Jew is put to the test, bow down to that idol, or face death. Jews, by and large, will choose death. It's not as if they can explain why. It's not as if they've come to some logical conclusion that, it's better to die than to worship an idol. It's this inborn, natural instinct. It transcends and defies logic. It's this faith element that says, I cannot do something that denies my God, and I'll die rather than doing that. More on that in chapter 19. The takeaway from all of this is, don't get carried away with how grand and smart you might actually be. The moment you acknowledge the limits of your rationale, and you acknowledge that there's something beyond it, now you've truly touched the infinite. Now you've truly met the divine. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude chapter 19.